The phone rang at 9:42 inches the morning. Kalen was mid-sentence cross-examining a witness who had just lied twice on the stand when his assistant slipped a note onto the prosecution table. 3 words: hospital, pick up. He paused, looked at the note, then looked at the witness. No further questions. He stepped into the corridor and answered on the second ring. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, a woman reading from a file the way nurses do when the information belongs to someone else's emergency. Mr. Drax, this is Mercy General Medical Center. We are calling regarding a patient currently admitted to our maternity ward. Kalen said nothing. Let her continue. You are listed as the father of a child born 6 weeks premature. We have a procedure scheduled for tomorrow morning, and we require paternal consent. Is this something you are available to provide? 4 seconds passed. The corridor was empty. A door somewhere behind him opened and closed. A cart rolled past the far end of the hall. Everything moved normally, the way the world does when it doesn't know it just changed something. What is the mother's name? He asked. The nurse answered. Seraphine Vale. He ended the call without saying goodbye, walked back into the courtroom, told the judge he had a family emergency, handed his second chair the rest of the morning, and left. Hi viewers, has someone ever made a life-changing decision about you without giving you a single chance to speak? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to know. Kalen Drax did not panic. That was the thing about him, the thing that made courtrooms go quiet when he walked in, and made opposing counsel reconsider their positions during recess. He did not panic. He processed. He moved. By 10:06 a.m., he was in his car. By 10:12, he was pulling into the parking structure at Mercy General, still wearing his trial suit, his tie slightly loosened. His jaw set the way it always was when he was walking into something that required him to be the most composed person in the room. The front desk didn't stop him. The floor supervisor found him before he asked. His name opened doors the way it always had, not loudly, just automatically, the way power moves when it has been practiced long enough to become invisible. 3rd floor, East Wing, room 312. He walked the corridor, and the corridor did nothing to meet him halfway. Fluorescent light, antiseptic, the soft mechanical rhythm of monitors behind closed doors. This was not his world. His world had marble floors and wood paneling, and the controlled tension of arguments that mattered. This world had linoleum and curtain rods, and a whiteboard outside a nursing station with names written in dry erase marker. He slowed at a window on his left. The neonatal unit. Glass panel, low light inside, 3 nurses moving between stations, with the quiet efficiency of people who had long ago stopped being surprised by fragility. He looked through the glass for 6 seconds. Maybe 7. He kept walking. Room 312 was at the end. The door was closed. A small card on the outside read the last name in plain black print, Vale. Kalen stood in front of that door and felt something he had not felt in a courtroom in 11 years. He did not have a case prepared. He had assumptions. He had a timeline that didn't make sense yet. He had 16 months of silence and a phone call that had just dismantled the structure of a morning he thought he understood. And somewhere on the other side of that door was a woman he had divorced in 11 minutes and had not spoken to since holding a child the hospital had decided was legally his. His hand moved to the handle. He stopped. Because for the first time in his career, Kalen Drax was about to walk into a room without knowing what the evidence was going to say. And every prosecutor knows the moment you stop controlling the evidence starts controlling you. He pushed the door open. Seraphine was sitting up, not resting, not diminished, sitting with her spine straight and her hands folded in her lap, wearing a hospital gown like it was a deliberate choice, her eyes already on the door when it opened. Like she had heard his footsteps from the end of the hall and had used the last 30 seconds to decide exactly what expression she would let him see. The one she chose was nothing. Not cold, not angry, not tearful or relieved or trembling with anything that would give him the upper hand. Just present. Still. the face of someone who had already rehearsed every version of this moment and was now simply living the last one. Kaylin stepped inside, let the door close behind him. The room had a bassinet to the left of the bed. He did not look at it yet. He looked at her. "You should have called," he said. 3 words that came out wrong, too fast, too flat. He heard it as soon as they left his mouth, the prosecutor's reflex, reaching for control of a room he had no authority in. Seraphine looked at him for one long beat. "You disconnected before I could." The room held that sentence. He had expected many things. An explanation that arrived defensive, a posture that bent toward apology, some version of the conversation where she needed something from him and the power arrangement was familiar. Instead, she gave him a sentence that arrived like a document, filed, dated, undeniable. He moved to the chair beside the window. He did not sit. He stood behind it, one hand on the back, the position he took in the courtroom when he was thinking and didn't want the jury to know it. "You were pregnant when we filed," he said. "Yes. And you signed anyway. You had already decided." She said it without heat, without accusation. "The way you state a fact that stopped being painful because it became too true to carry weight anymore. I signed because continuing wasn't possible, not because I agreed with the reason." Kaylin's jaw tightened. The photograph was staged. She didn't let the sentence breathe. "The man in that photograph was Darius Wren, my brother's business partner. I had a portrait commission, 6-week engagement, fully invoiced, session notes documented. I tried to tell you." A pause that had nothing soft in it. "You filed before I could finish the sentence." He said nothing. Outside, a cart rolled past the door. A monitor somewhere along the corridor beeped twice and went quiet. The world continued operating at its own pace, indifferent to what was collapsing inside this room. "I have the invoice," she said. "The session log. The timestamp on the photograph doesn't match the time I listed on the intake form. It was taken from the opposite side of the building, from an angle that required planning." Another pause. "Someone sent you that image because they knew how you'd respond." Kaylin looked at her. Really looked at her. The way he looked at a witness when the testimony was starting to fold in a direction he hadn't prepared for. "You knew it was planted," he said. "I suspected." She held his gaze. "But you moved so fast there was no window to prove it." 47 minutes. That was how long it had taken her to sign the divorce papers after they were served. He had counted it at the time and read it as guilt. As a woman who knew exactly what she had done and wanted the situation closed before the truth caught up. Now he was standing in a hospital room 16 months later, and the number meant something else entirely. 47 minutes was how long it took a woman who understood she was not going to be heard to stop trying. She didn't argue, and that wasn't weakness. Because a person doesn't go quiet when they're guilty. They go quiet when they realize the verdict was already written before they ever had a chance to speak. The consent form was on the bedside table. Kaylin saw it from across the room but didn't move toward it. Not yet. He was still standing behind the chair, and his mind was doing what it always did when evidence didn't line up, running the sequence backward, looking for the fracture point. Month 0. He filed. Month 1. The divorce was finalized. Seraphine reverted to her birth name. The last communication between them was a text message he had sent 2 words. "Stay well." Not because he meant it warmly, but because it was the kind of thing you said when you wanted to close a chapter cleanly. She hadn't responded. He had taken that as confirmation. Month 7. A child was born. 6 weeks premature. Mother, Seraphine Vale. Father, listed on intake documentation as Kaylin Drack's information she had provided voluntarily at check-in, with no legal summons, no notification to him, no request attached. She gave them his name and then told no one. Month 16. A restricted hospital line. A nurse reading from a file. A 4-second silence in an empty courtroom corridor. And now this room, this chair, this woman sitting with her spine straight and her hands folded, and her eyes holding something that had survived 16 months of silence without softening. The math was not complicated once you ran it clean. If the divorce finalized at month 1 and the child arrived at month 7, then the pregnancy began before the divorce was filed, not after, not during. Before. Which meant that when Seraphine Vale signed those divorce papers in 47 minutes, she was already carrying his child. Which meant every assumption he had built the last 16 months on was constructed on a foundation that never existed. Kaylin exhaled slowly. He didn't let it show on his face. He was good at that, absorbing information that should break a person's composure and converting it into something controlled, something that could be filed away and processed later. It was the skill that made him dangerous in a courtroom. It was the skill that had made him brutal in a marriage. "Why didn't you contact me after?" he asked. "After the divorce. After you knew the pregnancy was confirmed." Seraphine turned her head toward the bassinet. A brief look. The kind a person takes when they need a second that isn't about the other person in the room. Then she looked back at him. "I sent you a message," she said. "I didn't receive it." "You received it. You didn't open it." He went very still. She reached toward the table beside her bed, picked up her phone, turned the screen toward him without crossing the room, held it at an angle he could read from where he stood. A message thread, his number at the top, her name below it. One message. Delivered. Timestamp 4 days before the divorce was finalized. A medical attachment. Mercy General Reproductive Health. Her name. A gestational confirmation dated 11 days before he filed. He had archived her contact. A focus mechanism he used during high-pressure cases, routing certain numbers to a secondary folder so they didn't interrupt his concentration. He had done it automatically the morning after the photograph arrived. He hadn't checked the folder. He never checked the folder during trial prep. He had a documented habit of filtering out information he had decided wasn't relevant. And the most important message Seraphine had ever sent him had arrived inside exactly that filter. So why didn't she call him sooner? Because the hospital didn't call him for closure. They called him because something was about to go wrong, and the form on that bedside table needed a signature that only he could legally provide. Kaylin picked up the consent form. Standard language. 2 pages. The kind of document that looked bureaucratic until you read it slowly and realized every clause was a wall between the child and an outcome nobody wanted. He read it the way he read every document fully, without skimming, his eyes moving through each line and registering what was protected and what was required. His name was pre-typed on the signature line. Someone on the hospital's legal team had pulled the intake file and done the preparation. Efficient. Thorough. The kind of institutional precision that exists because too many people have tried to make these moments harder than they need to be. He set it back on the table. Not signed yet. Not because he was refusing, but because once he signed it, the word theoretical would stop applying to anything in this room. And he needed 1 more minute with the version of himself that could still choose how to enter this. He moved to the bassinet. 3 steps. The room was small enough that 3 steps covered it. He looked down. The child was sleeping. The particular kind of sleep that belongs entirely to newborns, absolute, unconscious, a quality of stillness that has no performance in it, because it doesn't know what performance is yet. He was wrapped in a standard hospital blanket, pale blue with a thin stripe. His hands were curled against his chest. His chest rose, fell, rose again with a rhythm that had been running on its own for 7 months, without Kaylin knowing it existed. He was small. Kaylin had prepared himself for small. Premature by 6 weeks, he had looked it up in the car on the way over, the way he looked up every case detail before walking into an unfamiliar room. He knew the statistics. He knew what 6 weeks early meant medically, what it required, what the risks attached to it were. He had not prepared himself for the feeling. There was no word for it that fit inside a courtroom. It wasn't sentiment. It wasn't guilt, not yet. It was something more immediate than either of those. the recognition of a fact that had been true for 7 months without his knowledge, standing in front of him now, in the form of a sleeping child with hands the size of a silver dollar. Along the child's upper lip was a faint line, a configuration, the kind of thing that only means something to someone who has seen a family photograph taken 40 years ago. His grandmother had pointed it out once. Kaylin stood very still. Seraphine said nothing. She watched him the way a person watches a building they've been waiting to fall, not with cruelty, not with satisfaction, just with the patience of someone who has already accepted the outcome and is simply waiting for it to arrive. He didn't reach for the child. He stood at the edge of the bassinet and looked at him the way he looked at evidence when the case was about to change shape. Behind him, the door opened. A nurse stepped in, checked the monitor, made a notation on the tablet at the foot of the bed, and left without speaking. The door clicked shut. Kaylin picked up the consent form again. He read through it one more time. Then he looked at Seraphine. "What is the procedure?" he asked. Not because the document hadn't explained it, but because he wanted to hear it from her. Wanted to hear what 16 months of alone had taught her about this child's medical needs. What she knew that he didn't. What she had been carrying by herself in the space where a co-parent should have been standing. She told him. Precise, clinical, the terms correct, the context clear. She had done her research. She had spoken to 3 specialists. She had asked every question twice and written the answers down. She had been doing this alone. Kaylin held the pen. He wasn't walking toward answers anymore. He was standing inside the evidence, and the evidence was asking him what kind of man he was going to be when no one was watching and no verdict was attached. He signed. The pen moved across the line without hesitation. One clean signature, the same one he put on briefs and motions and documents that shaped other people's lives. This time, it shaped his own. He set the pen down. The form went into the folder the nurse collected 40 seconds later, and just like that, the legal part was done. Simple, quiet. The way the most permanent decisions always are, nothing marking the moment, except the soft click of a door closing. Kaylin stayed where he was. He didn't sit. He stood near the window where the afternoon light had shifted, the gray of morning giving way to something thinner and more honest. The bassinet was between him and the door. Seraphine was still in the bed, watching him with the same expression she'd held since he walked in, composed, measured, giving him nothing he hadn't earned. "Tell me about Darius Wren," he said. She didn't answer immediately. He had learned years ago that Seraphine's silences were not hesitation. They were selection. She was choosing which truth to give him first, because she had more than one, and she was deciding the order. He was hired to renovate my brother Omari's studio space downtown. I'd known him 2 years. The portrait commission was Omari's idea, a birthday gift for their mother. We had 3 sessions over 6 weeks, all of them documented. She paused. "The photograph that was sent to you was taken from the roof of the building across the street. Professional angle. Not a phone, a lens." Kaylin felt something move through him that had no name in legal language. "You knew when it happened," he said. "I suspected 2 days after you filed. By the time I confirmed it, the paperwork was already in motion." She looked at her hands, then back at him. "You don't slow down once you decide something. I knew that before I married you." He absorbed that. There was no comfort in it, but there was honesty. And honesty was something Kaylin had spent his career demanding from other people. He did not get to refuse it now, because it was aimed at him. "Who sent it?" he said. "I have a theory." She said it in a way that told him the theory was not a theory at all. It was a conclusion she had reached with evidence she had gathered by herself, in the 16 months he had spent not asking. He looked at her. "I'll tell you," she said. "When the time is right." Kaylin had cross-examined senators. He had stood across from men who controlled things that governments pretended they didn't know about, and he had made them answer questions they had spent years building infrastructure to avoid. Not one of them had ever left him standing in a room feeling like the least prepared person present. Seraphine Vale, in a hospital gown, 7 days post-delivery, holding a secret she had earned with 16 months of alone. She did it without raising her voice. "He deserves to know the truth," she said. "Not about him. About the child." She nodded toward the bassinet. "All of it, when he's old enough. And until then?" She held his gaze. "Until then, the question isn't what I'm going to do." A pause that carried weight the way a sentence carries weight when every word in it is doing work. "The question is whether you're going to show up." Kaylin said nothing, because that sentence didn't ask for a speech. It didn't ask for an apology, or a promise, or a legal commitment framed the way he would have framed it if someone had handed him the brief. It asked for something he had never once been required to provide in a courtroom. Consistency, before anyone was watching, before there was a verdict attached. He looked at the child. The child slept on, indifferent and absolute, his chest rising and falling with the quiet authority of someone who had no idea what the adults in the room were trying to figure out. Kaylin reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out his business card, set it on the bedside table without flourish. "I'll be back tomorrow," he said, before the procedure. He moved toward the door. Seraphine's voice followed him. "Kaylin." He stopped, hand on the door. "The person who sent that photograph." A beat. "They didn't do it randomly. They knew your schedule. They knew your filing timeline. They knew exactly how many days you had before the case you were prepping went to trial, and they timed it so you'd move too fast to stop." He turned around slowly. She was looking at him with something in her eyes that wasn't quite warning and wasn't quite fear. It was the specific expression of someone who has been sitting with a dangerous truth long enough to know exactly how dangerous it is. "Somebody inside your office sent that photograph," she said. The room went very still, because that sentence didn't close anything. It opened something that had been sitting underneath 16 months of silence, waiting for the exact moment when Kaylin Drax was finally in a position where he had no choice but to listen. And now that he was listening, the real case was only just beginning. Kaylin didn't sleep that night. He sat at his desk at 2:17 a.m. with the city spread dark and quiet below him, a glass of water untouched at his right hand, and a single name written on the legal pad in front of him. Darius Wren. He had already pulled the public record. Omari Vale's renovation contractor, licensed, clean. 3 years of commercial work on the South Side, no litigation, no complaints filed. A man who had done exactly what Seraphine said he had done walked out of a studio building on a Thursday night after a portrait session, and whose exit had been photographed from a rooftop across the street with equipment that cost more than most people made in a month. That last part was not in the public record. Kaylin had worked that out himself. He had prosecuted enough surveillance cases to know what a rooftop angle required: clearance, access, a specific lens with a specific reach. You didn't set that up in 20 minutes. You scouted the location. You chose your window. You waited. Somebody had planned this, and that somebody had known his schedule well enough to time it, to drop the photograph into his orbit at the precise moment when he had the least margin to slow down and verify anything. He tapped his pen against the legal pad once, twice. His trial calendar from 16 months ago was still in the archived drive. He pulled it up on his laptop, scrolled to the week the photograph arrived. Zaire Holloway murder trial. Day 11 of 14, the most media-covered case of that year. Kaylin had been working 17-hour days. His second chair had been handling all external communications. His assistant had been routing everything through a priority filter. Anyone who knew his system would have known exactly what that week looked like. He scrolled to his office staff directory. 6 names. 4 had been with him more than 2 years. 2 were newer, both hired within the 8 months before the photograph arrived. He stared at the screen. Then he picked up his phone and called the one person in the city who owed him a favor large enough to cover what he was about to ask. Deshaun Mercer answered on the first ring despite the hour, which told Kaylin that Deshaun either never slept or had been expecting this call. "I need a communication audit," Kaylin said. 16 months back. Everything routed through my office address. A pause. That's a wide net, Deshawn said. I know what I'm looking for. Another pause. Longer. Give me 48 hours, Deshawn said. Kaylin ended the call, set the phone down, looked at the legal pad. One name written at the top. He drew a line beneath it and wrote a second one. The name of his newest hire. The one who had started 8 months before the photograph. The one who had been responsible for routing his external communications during the Holloway trial. The one who had flagged the anonymous tip as urgent and hand-delivered it to his table during cross-examination. Zora Kimathi. He stared at the name for a long time. Then he wrote one more word beneath it. Why? Because the photograph was not an act of chaos. Chaos doesn't rent rooftop access and select the right lens. This was architecture. Somebody had built something carefully, patiently, with a clear outcome in mind. And the outcome had been achieved with precision. His marriage had ended. His child had grown 7 months without a father. And Seraphine Vale had spent 16 months alone with a truth she couldn't deliver to a man who had archived her contact and stopped listening before she finished speaking. Kaylin closed the laptop. Outside, the city moved in its slow pre-dawn rhythm. Delivery trucks, distant sirens, the particular silence that exists between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. when even the night has run out of things to say. He thought about the way Seraphine had looked at him when she said it. Somebody inside your office sent that photograph. Not afraid, not triumphant. Just steady the way a person looks when they have been holding a piece of information long enough that the weight of it has become familiar. She had known for months. She had waited. Not because she was passive, because she was precise. And precision, Kaylin understood better than almost anything, requires patience. He picked up the pen again, added a third line to the legal pad. What did they want after the divorce? Because dismantling a marriage was not an end, it was a move. And every move in a long game is in service of something that comes next. The question was what came next. And why did it require Kaylin Drax to be alone, estranged, and believing a lie for 16 months? The answer was somewhere in his office. And the moment he found it, everything Seraphine had been quietly protecting was going to make sense, in a way that was going to cost someone everything. The file arrived at 6:48 a.m. Deshawn Mercer worked fast when the stakes were clear, and Kaylin had made the stakes clear in the 42 seconds the phone call lasted. The encrypted folder landed in Kaylin's secure inbox before he had finished his first cup of coffee. No subject line, no message, just the folder and a single text that followed 3 minutes later. You're not going to like it. Kaylin opened the file. It took him 11 minutes to read through the first section. Communication logs. Outgoing messages from his office server during the 4-week window surrounding the Holloway trial. Deshawn had flagged the anomalies in red. There were 9 of them. 8 were administrative scheduling conflicts, misdirected briefs, 1 duplicate filing that had already been corrected on record. The 9th was different. An outgoing message from his office server. Sent from a secondary address Kaylin did not recognize, a shadow account. The kind that gets created and deleted within a narrow window. Recipient. An external address with a domain name that resolved to a defunct photography company registered in Delaware 18 months ago. The message contained 1 attachment. An invoice. Kaylin's office. His firm's letterhead. His signature forged clean enough that he would have accepted it as his own if he hadn't known he hadn't written it. The invoice was addressed to a private security firm. Services rendered, background documentation, subject surveillance, residential and professional monitoring. His name was listed as the authorizing party, which meant that whoever had set this up had not just sent a photograph. They had created a paper trail that made it look like Kaylin had commissioned surveillance on his own wife, and then used that surveillance to manufacture grounds for a divorce he hadn't technically initiated. He sat back in his chair. The room was very quiet. He understood the architecture now, fully, all of it. The photograph was not the weapon. The photograph was the trigger. The weapon was the invoice, the document that, if it ever surfaced in the right context, would make it appear that Kalen Drax had orchestrated the entire collapse of his marriage, for reasons that had nothing to do with infidelity, and everything to do with something he was being protected from knowing. He scrolled further. Deshawn had included a second section. Communication records from Zora Kimathi's work device pulled through the firm's IT server with a legal access code Kalen had authorized during a security audit 8 months ago, which meant every message on that device had always been retrievable. Zora had been communicating with an outside number for the duration of her employment. Kalen recognized the area code. He had prosecuted a firm tied to that area code 4 years ago, a private consulting group that operated legitimate services on the surface and supplied legal cover for financial operations that required the appearance of arm's-length distance. The case had ended in 3 convictions. The firm had restructured, changed its name, moved its principal address twice, and apparently hired someone new. He picked up his phone, called his head of HR. "Zora Kimathi," he said when she answered. "I need her full employment file on my desk in 1 hour, and I need you to pull her access logs for the last 16 months. Every document she opened, every file she touched." A pause. "Kalen, it's 7 in the morning. I know what time it is." He ended the call, sat with the screen in front of him and the file open, and the name of a defunct Delaware photography company sitting at the center of something that was much larger than a divorce. Seraphine had told him someone in his office sent the photograph. She had said it the way she said everything, with the precision of someone who had been sitting with a conclusion long enough to know every angle of it. She had not told him the rest. She had said when the time is right. He understood now why she had waited. Because she hadn't been waiting for him to be ready. She had been waiting for him to be safe. Truth doesn't disappear. It waits. And the truth that Seraphine Vale had been sitting on for 16 months was not just about a photograph or a marriage or a child born without his father's name on the room door. It was about what someone had needed Kalen Drax not to know, and how far they had been willing to go to make sure he stayed in the dark. Kalen was at the hospital by 8:15 a.m. He didn't call ahead. He walked through the East Wing entrance the same way he had the day before, direct, unhurried, the kind of pace that doesn't invite questions, and took the stairs to the 3rd floor, because the elevator required waiting, and he was done waiting. He pushed open the door to room 312. Seraphine was awake. She had the child in her arms, not feeding him, just holding him. His small weight settled against her chest, with the ease of something that had already found its place. A nurse was completing a morning check on the monitor. She looked up when Kalen entered, noted something on her tablet, and left without comment. The room settled. Kalen pulled the chair close to the bed. Saturday set his phone face down on his knee. This was not a meeting. He was not going to conduct this like one. "Zora Kimathi," he said. Seraphine looked at him. Something moved across her face, not surprise. Recognition. The expression of someone who had been holding a name for a long time and just heard it said aloud by the right person. "How long have you known?" he asked. 8 months, she said. "I started looking 6 weeks after the divorce was finalized. I had time. A beat of quiet that held no bitterness in it, just fact. I had nothing but time. 8 months. She had been sitting on it for 8 months. Alone. In an apartment she was paying for by herself, growing a pregnancy nobody in his world knew about, and simultaneously building a case that most trained investigators would have taken a team to construct. "What do you have?" he asked. She reached to the drawer of the bedside table, pulled out a phone he hadn't seen before, not her regular one, an older model. She unlocked it and handed it to him without explanation. He scrolled. Photographs. Screenshots of message threads. A scanned copy of a lease agreement for a storage unit, registered to a company name he recognized from the file Deshawn had sent him an hour ago. A typed document, single-spaced, 12 pages, with dates, names, communication summaries, and a timeline laid out with the clarity of a brief prepared for filing. She had built a case file, by herself, on a secondary device, from an apartment, while pregnant. Kaylin scrolled slowly. He read carefully. He did not rush through it the way he would have rushed through a brief from a junior associate. He read it the way it deserved, line by line, registering every connection she had made and every gap she had left deliberately unfilled because she hadn't been able to reach it alone. The gaps were the right ones. She had known where the edges of her access were and had stopped exactly there rather than speculating. That discipline, knowing when to stop, was rarer than the research itself. "The storage unit," he said. "Have you been inside? I have photographs of the exterior and the access log." "I couldn't get further than that." He nodded. "The consulting firm," he said. "You traced it back to Vance Holloway Group." She blinked. "Just once." "You know the name," she said. "I prosecuted 3 of their people 4 years ago. The firm restructured after the convictions." He handed the phone back. "What I didn't know until this morning was that they had rebuilt inside my office." The room was very quiet. The child made a small sound against her chest. She shifted him slightly, automatically, her hand moving to his back in the unhurried way of someone who had been doing this long enough that it required no thought. "They needed you discredited," she said, "or distracted, or both." She looked at him steadily. "You were the only prosecutor in the city who had the case history to go after their new operation. You had the prior convictions. You had the relationships with the federal contacts they couldn't reach. You were the problem they needed removed from the board. So they removed my marriage instead. They removed your focus." She paused. "A grieving man, a public divorce, a scandal attached to your personal life. You'd have been too buried to see what they were rebuilding. And they were right." She said it without accusation. "For 16 months you didn't look." He held that. She had chosen dignity over chasing him. She had protected the child. She had built the case. She had waited for him to arrive at a point where he was capable of listening, not out of forgiveness, not out of hope, but out of strategy. Because she understood, better than anyone, that Kaylin Drax was only useful as an ally when he arrived at the truth himself. You could not hand it to him and expect him to act on it. He had to find the thread. He had to pull it. She had left the thread where he could find it. She didn't need him to save her, Kaylin thought. She had needed him to wake up. And the most devastating part, the part that would take him a long time to sit with, was that she had done it all without asking him for a single thing. Which meant the real question had never been whether Seraphine Vale could survive alone. It had always been whether Kaylin Drax was worth the cost of letting back in. The procedure was scheduled for 10:30 a.m. At 9:55, Kaylin was in the hallway outside the neonatal unit when his phone rang. Deshaun Mercer. He answered on the first ring. "I found the storage unit access log," Deshaun said. "Registered to a shell under the Vance Holloway restructure. Last accessed 11 days ago." A pause. "Kaylin, whatever is in that unit, someone visited it recently. This is live." Kaylin looked through the glass at the corridor leading to room 312. "Send me the address," he said. He slid the phone into his pocket. Stood there another 4 seconds. Then he pushed open the door and walked back into the room. Seraphine was being prepared for the transfer a nurse on each side, the bassinet being wheeled toward the procedural wing. She was still in the bed, watching them move the child with the focused attention of a woman who had not looked away from him once in 7 days. Kaylin stepped beside her. "I need to tell you something," he said. She turned. "This is not finished," he said. "The people who did this, they accessed the storage unit 11 days ago. Whatever they built in my office, whatever they were protecting, it's still running." She didn't flinch. She looked at him the way she had looked at him from the moment he arrived, composed, measuring, deciding how much weight to assign to what he was saying. "I know," she said. "You know. I flagged it 8 days ago. I couldn't reach the access log directly, but I noticed a pattern in the company registration filings. They moved something. She paused. I didn't know it was the unit specifically, but I knew they were active. He stared at her. 8 days ago, she had been 2 days postpartum, managing a premature infant in a hospital room, and she had still been tracking corporate registration patterns on a secondary phone. What do you need from me? He asked. The question surprised him as he said it. Not the words, the direction. He had spent his entire career framing questions as instruments, tools to extract information. This one came out different. Genuine. The question of a person standing in a room where they have finally accepted that they are not the most prepared individual present. Seraphine was quiet for a moment. I need you to go to the storage unit, she said, before they clear it. She looked at the doorway where the bassinet had just been wheeled through. I need you to do that while I handle what's in that room. She meant the child, the procedure. The next 2 hours that she would spend in a hospital waiting on the outcome of something she had no control over. She was dividing the work the way partners divide it, based on who was positioned to do what, without hierarchy, without negotiation. He nodded. I'll be back before they finish, he said. She looked at him for one long beat. Not with hope. Not with trust, not yet. With the specific expression of someone extending a first measured amount of credit to a person who had previously overdrawn every account they had. I know the procedure window, she said. You have 90 minutes. He moved toward the door. Kaylin. He stopped. Don't go alone, she said. Take Deshawn. He turned to look at her one more time. She was already looking toward the hallway where her child had just been wheeled. Divided, focused, handling 2 emergencies simultaneously, without requiring anyone to admire her for it. He left. The elevator took 14 seconds. His car was on level 2. He was pulling out of the parking structure at 10:08 a.m., with Deshawn Mercer on speaker, and an address on the east side loading into his navigation, and the particular clarity that arrives when a man finally stops reacting and starts seeing. This wasn't redemption. Not yet. Because doing the right thing once under pressure, with stakes attached, when the consequences of inaction were visible and immediate, that wasn't the same as becoming someone different. That was just a man moving in the right direction. Whether he stayed there, that was the question Seraphine had been waiting 16 months to see answered. The storage unit was clean. Not empty clean. The kind of clean that happens when someone with training has 40 minutes and a reason. The shelving was bare. The floor had been swept. A single overhead bulb burned against bare concrete walls, and the only thing left behind was a smell, industrial solvent, the kind used on documents. Kaylin stood in the center of it for 10 seconds. Then Deshawn crouched near the back wall, pulled a penlight from his jacket, and ran the beam along the floor seam. Here, Deshawn said. A corner of paper, caught under the baseboard, no larger than a business card torn from something larger. The edge ragged, the print partial. Deshawn photographed it before touching it, then bagged it. They were back in the car by 10:44 a.m. Kaylin was back at Mercy General by 11:03. The procedure had finished at 10:58. The attending physician met him at the entrance to the recovery corridor. Good outcome, no complications. The child had moved through it exactly as projected. He was stable. He was already back in the bassinet. Kaylin walked into room 312. Seraphine was alone. The child was beside her. She was not holding him. Her hands were flat on the blanket, one on each side of her, the posture of someone who has been sitting very still while waiting for news and has not yet received permission to relax. She looked up when he came in. He said it before he sat down. The unit was cleared, but Deshawn found a partial document, enough to identify a registration number. We can trace it. She exhaled. One slow breath, controlled on the way out, the kind of exhale that has weeks of held air inside it. And the child? He asked. He's good. She looked at the bassinet. They said he responded well, better than the baseline projection. Kaylin sat in the chair beside the bed. Neither of them spoke for a moment. The monitor ran its steady line. Afternoon light came through the half-shuttered window in a long, warm stripe across the floor, different from the gray of 2 days ago. Something had shifted in the light quality. October moving toward itself, the city outside continuing at its own pace, indifferent and constant. "I'm going to file a motion Monday morning," Kaylin said, "requesting a formal investigation into the Vance Holloway restructure. I have enough from the communication logs to open the door. The partial document gives me a second thread." Seraphine nodded. "That will move fast once it's filed," she said. "They'll know immediately." "Yes, which means Zora Kamathi will move. I've already had her access suspended. HR locked the system at 8 this morning. She doesn't know yet." Seraphine looked at him steadily. "And when she finds out, she'll contact whoever is above her in the chain." He met her eyes. "Which is what I want. Because that contact will be logged, and that log becomes the next document in the case." A silence. Then Seraphine said something he hadn't expected. "You're good at this," she said. Not warmly, not as a compliment delivered to close distance between them. As a statement of fact from someone who had spent 8 months doing a version of the same work by herself on a secondary phone from an apartment, and understood exactly what it required. He looked at her. "So are you?" he said. That landed differently from anything else he had said in 2 days. Because it wasn't an apology, and it wasn't a promise. It was recognition. The specific kind that doesn't ask for anything back, that simply places a fact in the room and leaves it there. Seraphine looked at the child. "His name is Callum," she said. "Callum Jace." Kaylin said nothing for a moment. "No last name listed yet," she added. "On the birth certificate." He understood what she was not saying. She wasn't asking. She was not going to ask. She was simply stating a fact that a space existed, that it was currently unfilled, and that what happened to it was going to be determined by something other than this conversation. It was going to be determined by what came after, by whether he showed up Tuesday, and the Tuesday after that, by whether the motion he filed Monday was the first move in a sequence or a single act performed under pressure that faded once the crisis did, by whether Callum Jace grew up with a father's name on a document or a father's presence in a room, and whether those two things ever became the same. Kaylin looked at his son. He had no speech for this moment, no closing argument, no framing that made the last 16 months into something that resolved cleanly into a lesson and a better future. The last 16 months were what they were. They lived in the record now, the way everything eventually does, permanent, specific, and unable to be unfiled. What he had was Tuesday, and the Tuesday after that, he reached into the bassinet. For the first time, he picked the child up. Callum Jace did not startle. He settled the small, absolute weight of him shifting against Kaylin's forearm with the particular trust of someone who does not yet know what trust costs. His hands uncurled slightly. His chest rose and fell with the same steady rhythm that had been running for 7 months without Kaylin knowing it existed. The room was quiet. Seraphine watched. She didn't look away. She didn't fill the silence with anything. Outside, the city moved. The monitor ran its line. The afternoon light held its stripe across the floor. He didn't fix the past. The past was already filed and it wasn't going anywhere. He changed what came next. One Tuesday at a time. He still hadn't earned forgiveness. That was the truth, and he knew it. But Callum Jace was in his arms, and the space on the birth certificate was still open. And Seraphine Vale was watching him with the careful eyes of a woman who had survived everything alone and was deciding slowly, on her own terms, whether alone was still necessary, because being the father was never the question. Becoming one that was the work that had just begun. If this story moved something in you, if you've ever watched someone make a decision about your life before you had a chance to speak, drop your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if you want more stories like this, stories that hit hard, tell the truth, and don't let you look away, subscribe to this channel right now, and turn on your notifications. Every week we bring you a new story that challenges the way you think, the way you love, and the way you see yourself. Share this one with someone who needs it. We'll see you in the next story.